Welcome to the Crossing the Line podcast. I'm your host, Joelle Casteix. If you caught our last episode, you heard my conversation with journalist Matt Drange. And if you didn't, you want to go back and listen to it when you're done with this. We talked about his groundbreaking investigation into predatory grooming and educator sexual abuse at Rosemead High School in the Los Angeles area. And it started with Eric Burgess, the man who had been his journalism teacher and mentor years earlier. But he exposed a lot more than Burgess. He exposed numerous abusers, a web of misconduct, tons of cover-up, and way too many enablers. But he also gave generations, and I'm not joking here, generations of survivors a voice to tell their accounts and make sure that what happened to them doesn't happen to another student at Rosemead. Today, I have one of those students. Kristy Rowe is a survivor from Rosemead. And she's a fighter, and I'm so honored to have her here today. But I'll let her tell her story. Welcome to the podcast, Kristy.
Thank you, Joelle, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Our conversation, when we were talking the other day, you opened it by telling me all I owe anyone is the truth. And that's such an amazing statement, especially for a survivor, considering most are too scared or ashamed to speak their truth. So tell me and the listeners your account of high school and what brought you to going public with your abuse.
I think being presented with the opportunity, certainly. I mean, I'm still living locally. I still live in Rosemead. And I'm still affiliated with the high school to some degree. I've coached there in recent years. And so I've never lost touch with what happens. You know, the Rosemead's a small town. And gossip is something that fuels, everybody that lives here. So if something's going on, I mean, and of course, as soon as that article was going to be released by Matt, that's definitely what brought up, I think, all the memories and all the realizations. And I think that was something that I also had struggled with, seeing myself as a victim or a survivor. It was an experience, I know, albeit a very unique experience, to have a sexual relationship with a teacher while you're in high school. I didn't so much see myself as a victim initially. It wasn't until I heard more stories and other stories and current stories. Um, and that definitely inspired me, because it reading about it in its totality is like, wow, we have a really huge problem here. Um, and instead of perpetuating that problem, being a part of the solution is really, really important to me. And just speaking about it that one time with Matt in an article was just the beginning, I think. Well, I know. And so I had no problem sharing what my experience was. Again, if I don't tell the entire truth, then how is anybody ever going to benefit from it? The idea is to make this stop, to stop this perpetual cycle of abuse that has been occurring at our high school. And I know it's not just our high school, it's a nationwide issue. So yeah, that kind of just opened up the door for me, was to be given that opportunity to speak with Matt and to be featured in the article. And I did it in the most honest way I could. I allowed him to use my name from the beginning. I have nothing to be ashamed of. I'm not going to hide and I guess continue being a victim by shielding my identity and not telling the full truth.
So can you tell us, as much as you're comfortable with, about your story and what happened to you?
Yes. So being that it is over 20 years ago, there are some fuzzy details. But initially, the teacher that I had the experience with, he was a computer science teacher, not one that I ever was enrolled in. It was just, he was very popular amongst students, male and female, but primarily female. Everybody spent a lot of their free time in his classroom. They would have lunch in his classroom. They would go to their classroom during their teaching assistant periods, which essentially can be a free period. So I was very aware of who he was. To my opinion of him then was he was very good looking. He was younger, on the younger side. I want to say he was approximately mid to late 20s when he was a teacher while I was a junior, senior in high school, which was in 1998 and 99. Fairly young, to a degree for us then. T- He was just a really happy guy. Like I said, did not have him as a teacher, but I would walk by his classroom repeatedly and say, "Hey, how's it going?" And he'd give a smile and a wave and really friendly. It just happened to be, I believe it was the end of the school year for my junior year. And I was getting ready to, begin summer going into my senior year. And I had walked by his classroom in the afternoon, kind of after hours. And I just decided that I was going to pop in and actually have like a full conversation with him for our first time. And so I went in there and we just started talking, and I felt very comfortable opening up to him about my personal life. I'm sure I was probably crying about some boy or something trivial, and we just got along very nicely. Conversations continued after that. I would stop in to say hi to him, and it was nothing that we ever hid. It was everybody would always stop in and say hi. And, I remember he gave the best hugs, and I just felt very comfortable and safe and supported. And he was very honest too. He didn't treat me like a child. He definitely treated me more as a peer to a degree. Although, I mean, you can tell that he had this air of, I'm your superior in a sense, like
There's still
I
that
definitely
power
have,
differential. Yeah.
I'm an adult and you're not, and so that was very clear. But I, there were times where we would go to lunch. We would the where he parked was kind of secluded, and so like if it was pretty brazen, now looking back at it, we would be like, hey, meet me at the car at 2 o'clock or something, and we would meet at his car and hop in and exit campus really quickly and go have lunch, at a restaurant, locally too. I mean, it was it was definitely acceptable for teachers to socialize with students like that. He wasn't the only one. I mean, that's the whole thing. It was almost normalized. Teachers would pile students into their cars and take them out to have pizza. I mean, it could be groups, it could be singular. So although me being seen with him when I wasn't even his student, I didn't have any association with him. I didn't, play as an athlete on one of his teams. So it would be kinda curious, like, why is Kristy with him? Because they have no association really. Um, but either way, we did it, and, there was never an issue of like, oh, if we got caught or we got seen, we would just say, "Oh, we're having lunch."
Yeah.
That was totally acceptable then.
It was he
Um,
was normalizing it.
yes, and again, in hindsight, because once I became a coach at, the high school, I had to go through the same clearance checks and same trainings. The, basically not just to be a coach, but like you have to go hours worth of training on sexual abuse and misconduct and to be a mandated reporter. And so, I mean, there was strict guidelines. Like, you do not put a student in your personal vehicle. Like, you just don't. And even at the time that I was doing it, I was still observing coaches doing it. And I'm like, you know, I mean, I'm known to break rules here and there, but when I'm like signing on to say I'm not going to put a student in my vehicle, like I'm taking that seriously.
Yeah.
So many of these men did not. It was they really were super brazen about it. And so I imagine those safeguards were in place when I was in high school. I imagine that they went through the same familiar training. So that's one of the other pieces of the puzzle that kind of made me realize what I had experienced was wrong. Um and the things that led up to it. But fast forward, so there was just a few situations where, like I said, we went to lunch and hung out. And then it was in the summer between my junior and senior year. I was definitely living it up and having a good time, and we had each other's phone numbers. We had pagers back then. We didn't
Oh,
have
yeah.
cell yeah, we had landlines, and so, we had landlines and pagers, and so he would page me or I would page him, and, then the invite to come over to his home happened, and I was, of course I wanna hang out with this older man, and, there had been nothing, sexual or intimate up until this point. No kissing, no holding hands, no snuggling for long periods. I mean, besides a hug, and hanging out and having conversation, nothing inappropriate, had really happened. And so I think there was an is like an assumption that going over to his home meant that something was going to occur. And so
On his part. Yeah.
yes, yeah. Well, yeah, I think he assumed it and myself as well. I didn't go over there like, "Oh no, we're just gonna sit on the couch." Like I knew something was gonna happen, you know? I mean, this was not my first time having sex or intercourse or any type of sexual I mean, I had already experienced, things like that prior. So, I mean, I know that there was always flirting, I think there was always the little compliments like, "Oh, you're so beautiful," and, "Oh, you would never, hook up with somebody like me, like, I'm too old for you," or something, but kind of insinuating that's what he wanted, and if I was ever game for it, then, let's go, kind of a thing. And so my accepting his invitation to his home, I knew what that meant. And so when I did get over there, I drove myself. I had my license at that time, and so I did drive myself. He lived, I want to say it had to have been less than 3 miles away from my home. And so it was, he'd get back then, you had to like handwrite directions. There's
Or
no
use your
Google
Thomas
Maps.
guide. Yeah.
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 So the oh my gosh, I'm aging myself. Yeah. And so I found his home very easily and, I walked in and there I do remember telling him what I liked to drink per se. I mean, I wasn't a drinker and I really didn't like drinking, but you kind of had to be cool. And so he asked what I wanted, and I think I picked something that one of my friends had always had, like, it was a Jack Daniel's Down Home Country Punch. They were these little bottles that pretty delicious, and so he had those, and, I remember it was dim in his house. It was evening, but, like, it wasn't like there was a ton of lights on. The TV was on in the living room, and we were just hanging out on the couch, and it was a little awkward. It was almost kinda like we knew what was gonna happen, so when's it gonna happen? And just like any, I guess, awkward first date that you kinda go on, or, that point in your relationship where you take the next step to be intimate. And so he asked, "Oh, do you wanna go lay down in my room?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure." And I remember it was a hot summer night, and I I can see it so vividly still that I walked into I remember the layout of his house, and I remember walking into his room, and he had a wall unit air conditioning, and it was so ice cold in the room. It felt so good, and his bed was really high, like, you could tell it's like a queen pillow top, bed, and it had this beautiful white crisp down comforter, and when you wrap yourself in one of those, it's so cold. It feels like you're in a cloud, like you're in the sky, and I remember just feeling like, "Oh, this is nice. Like, is this what an adult relationship is like?" Like this, I up until then, I'm dating little high school boys that, don't have their own homes and nice bedding, and air conditioning in their room. So, it was, it was very welcomed at that point. And, you know, we ended up having intercourse, as well as, did other things. And it was very consensual as underage sex can be. It was consensual.
Okay, it's
I
well,
was
and
only
that's a tricky one because first of all, legally you can't give consent
yes.
and at that age. And secondly, I see it more as compliance, and we'll get into that later.
I drove myself to the house. I wasn't forced to drink. I wasn't, roofied or, whatnot. I walked myself to the bedroom. I didn't feel pressured. I felt like I wanted to do this. I had that nervousness, like I said, like a first date, but um in my mind it's what I wanted and I was enjoying it. And so yeah, so we went through the motions. You know, I didn't stay long. It wasn't because he asked me to leave or anything like that. He was, still very kind and sweet. Nothing had changed. And, to be blatantly honest, I wasn't impressed with, the experience. And so it was something I never desired to do again. So it was a one and done type of a situation. And after that, our relationship of friendliness did not change. We were still very friendly. It the door was always open, he would say, "Hey, if you ever want to come hang out again, let me know," and but there was no pressure that he wasn't mean to me because I didn't say yes again. Um and we maintained a very friendly relationship until just a few years ago, until right before the article was released. And I haven't spoken to him since the article was released, but I saw him right before the article released, and it was like nothing had changed. And, you know, having children of my own now, I have a 23-year-old son, and who also went to Rosemead High School, and now I have a 10-year-old daughter. And when I say things would happen if I ever found out my daughter had this sort of a relationship in this exact scenario, that, heads would roll. There's the rage I feel even thinking of her possibly being put in that situation. I don't know what I would do. And that to me really solidifies like what happened to me was wrong. You know, all the little details that led up to that situation, we can talk about, but the bottom line is, even if I had thrown myself at him and begged him to please let me come over, and I did not by any means, but had I even done that, this is a person that was in a position that could have guided me in a whole different way, that should have contacted my mother. Like, just so I think Kristy wants to engage in an inappropriate relationship. I think there's just so many other options he should have taken, than to, and it, like I said, it wasn't like I did that. It's one thing, if somebody literally throws themselves at you, but that wasn't the situation. I was groomed. Um, and, from this experience of meeting with Matt and other victims, I've heard other stories specifically with the same predator. And I didn't even get groomed as much as they did, but they didn't ultimately end up having sex. But still, I wasn't alone there. I know somebody that he took to go get their belly button pierced or their tongue pierced, something like that, like without the parents' consent. Or he would pick them up from school and take them to school. Like he would pick them up on their way and or give them rides home. And I'm consistently, and I'm just like, oh, wow. Like you really had a lot of, like, it came to light that this was part of their life. Like this was their extracurricular activity, instead of hanging out with his own peers and his own, adult friends. This is what he spent his time doing, hanging out with young girls and taking and pushing the limits, taking advantage, not having to force anybody to do anything because, he did it with so many different girls, like, whoever took took a shot, and he wasn't going to get mad about it if it didn't work out in his favor because there's going to be another one. And the fact that as teachers, they get a new fresh batch every single year. And that to me is like mind blowing. And, just kind of touching light on Eric Burgess. Um,
The journalism teacher at Rosemead High
yes,
School for the
I'm very familiar with him. And And I saw those batches come in, and it was the same type of girl every single time. And yeah, I think the name of the article is just exactly what it is. It was a predator's playground. It really is, and it needs to stop. And that's what I'm hoping me sharing my story is going to do. And I hope more girls share their stories so that the district cannot deny what's occurring here.
Well, and your story is very powerful. First of all, because of your sheer honesty. Because, when I came forward with my abuse, my parents said you weren't abused. You drove over there, so you weren't abused. And so I know we're not the only girls that this happened to. And I want to touch on the grooming aspect of it. So can you rewind and tell the listeners what your home life was and stuff like that leading up to the abuse?
Okay. Well, I probably wouldn't have ever, gone to this man for any type of, advice or counseling or support or mentoring, if I had a father in my home. I did not. My biological father disappeared on my ninth birthday. I'll never forget, I received a birthday card on my ninth birthday, and it said, Happy birthday. You will never see me ever again because I don't want to pay child support and your mother won't let me see you otherwise. And that was it. And he disappeared. Yeah. So he disappeared. And then I did shortly after that get a stepfather that to me was amazing. I became daddy's little girl with him. And it took a bit. I wasn't nice at first, but then we had a nice bond and everything was going great until right before my freshman year in high school. Um, I had noticed some changes in him and he wasn't working and I didn't know what was happening. And then I discovered that he was I guess hooked on drugs. Specifically, I believe it was meth. And I discovered it. My sister and I confronted our mother with it. She then confronted him with it. I think she had known, but she tried to turn a blind eye, but she couldn't now because now we were aware of it. And basically it came to a head, one argument between him and I said, "You need to leave." I think I had just turned 14. It was around that summer. And I was like, you need to leave. You don't need to be here. You're not working. You're not doing anything. That was really hard because it was just, there's a huge shift in like maturity and power. Like he was not working. He was just doing nothing. And then
And
knowing that he was
you
on
had to be
drugs.
the adult.
Yeah. And I was like, you need to go, and that's it. And I was shocked. He actually left and there was no fight at all. He packed and left. And that was that. So that was right that summer leading into my freshman year. So basically my entire freshman career, I had no father figure. Um, and so, yeah, so I kind of, definitely put myself in situations where I was always seeking that male, mentoring and, just a father figure. I mean, it would come either from a boyfriend or a teacher or, whomever. And so, this teacher was one of those. And so and my mother, being a single mother of two teenagers, was working full time. She would leave at 7 a.m. before we even started school. And then she'd return after 10 or 11 p.m. after working 2 to 3 jobs. So I had all the freedom in the world. And it didn't help that I lived directly across the street from the high school. So I had access. I mean, that was my playground, to say poorly. But I spent so much time on campus. I was always on campus. So it made it very easy. I was a very easy target in that sense, like I was looking for it and he was willing to provide it. And so that's what I got out of it. And like I said, the friendship, inappropriate or not, it was for a little bit prior to us having sex, and then it lasted years after we ever had sex. And so, in my mind, it was kind of like it was still okay. All those years later, I would still go back and visit him, and if I was on campus, I would say hi. And so it was continuing that ruse of what we did was totally fine.
And he wants it that way because what he did was illegal, and he didn't want you coming forward, so he had to make it as normalized as possible.
Mhm. Yeah, and there was no hiding it, like I said, like, other teachers saw these interactions between female students, like I said, girls would go to his classroom all throughout the day, and they'd have to tell their teacher, like, "Oh, I'm going to this person's classroom. Can I have a pass to room 52?" And they would write the pass. So the teachers knew where these girls were going, and even then they didn't stop it. I mean, and I know that there were suspicions and nobody did anything about it. And I don't know
Well, I
why.
mean, going back to Eric Burgess, I mean, right around that time, they were throwing a baby shower for the student he ended up marrying. So, I mean, there were no boundaries anywhere. Now,
Mm-mm.
correct me if I'm wrong. Did the man who abused you end up marrying a student as well?
Yes, he did. It's my understanding that they didn't have a relationship while she was a student, but she had a younger sister who was also at the high school around the same time I was. And so he maintained a relationship like the same type of friendship that I had. And I wasn't the only person that ever went back to campus to like say hi to their teachers. It was a very welcomed, activity. Like alumni would always come back and say hi to their teachers. And so I think they maintained that type of a friendship. And then ultimately he pursued her. He really wanted to marry her. I mean, she is a really good person. And so, I mean, he definitely got very lucky marrying somebody like that.
So
I
what
mean, her and I
happened to
couldn't have
him?
been any more different in that sense, like, of our upbringing, like, she had a solid upbringing, she came from a good family, and so, yeah, he ultimately picked somebody who was a really good choice.
So what happened to him when the article came out?
Okay, so at this point, a little bit a backstory between, let's say, what happened between him and I and the article was he there was a full investigation into him. Um, he had been put on leave for paid administrative leave for at least a year or more, while they served search warrants on his home, his computers, his classroom, everything. The sheriff's department combed through everything and found nothing. So ultimately, he was reinstated after a year or two, and he went back to Rosemead. And then from there, I understand. I don't know if there was more rumblings or more accusations, but then he ended up getting moved over to Arroyo, which is an activity that we've now learned to say called pass the
That's in the
trash.
trash.
Yeah. So, okay, let's just take him out of this school that, he has a bad name at and hopefully nobody will know. I mean, thanks to social media these days, you really can't run from much. Oh, but he had moved over to Arroyo, I think, prior to social media and all that. This was, early 2000s. Uh So then he was there, I believe, all the way up until when the article was released. And then my understanding, he's resigned and now pursues a whole different career. He's not teaching. And I think even after Aurora, I think he jumped over to, had heard like another school district, maybe Mountain View School District, um, or Baldwin Park School District, something like that. And so, but ultimately, he's no longer teaching, from what I understand.
But there have been no criminal repercussions or
No,
anything like that? No. Just a year
never.
off of work with pay while they investigated
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. So I think it's Burgess, basically.
So I wanna go back to the grooming aspect because I think this is very important in your story and in my story and in a lot of girls, in that they are looking for mentorship. They are looking for, an adult figure in their lives. They're looking for, counseling. They're looking for guidance. And when you're a 15, 16-year-old girl, you don't really know how to say that exactly. And it's up to the adults to be able to put those boundaries on and say, "Hey, it sounds like you really need help with this. Let's sit and talk with it." Or let's get you to the school counselor or whatever. And when you said, he should have gone to my mother, I mean, if he if you had thrown yourself at him, he should have reported it, and then you could have gotten help, but you didn't throw yourself at him. But he had so many opportunities to do the right thing. And every time he did the wrong thing and made it look in a way that it was, it was consensual. It was compliant. You complied and, you comply with a lot of things, but legally there was no consent. Um, as far as your maturity, there wasn't consent and you had been forced into this adult position. I mean, the story about your dad, I mean, that broke my heart. And then your stepdad, and you had to assume that parenting role. And so you were put in this horrible position where every step of the way, he could have been a superhero for you. He could have been a
Mhm.
freaking superhero. But instead, he saw an easy target because he probably knew that you had had sex before because we all know how
Mm,
the rumor mill works. I mean, in
yeah.
my high school, we always knew which girls were, easy, which didn't mean they were easy. It just meant that, most of them were victims of childhood sexual abuse before and couldn't, didn't have an understanding of boundaries. So, I mean, you coming forward and talking about the very intricate and complicated details of your abuse is so powerful because women have been silenced for so long when it comes to this. And I just want to say how proud I am of you for speaking your truth and just coming forward with it and saying this is how it is and I know it's this way for other women who need to come forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even I think the key word is not women, is girls. I was a girl. And you know, and like you're saying, compliant versus consensual is that's it right there. It's you don't get to say yes. Like anytime a girl can say, "Oh, but I was the one that did it and I asked him to do that," or, "I really wanted to go." No, you don't get to say yes. Like that's why we have parents. That's why we're not adults until we're 18, and even then that's debatable. It's no, you don't get to say yes to getting in the car. You don't get to say yes to a lunch date. You don't get to say yes to hanging out in a teacher's classroom when they're not your teacher. Like you don't get to say yes to all of those things, and the fact that we're able to get away with all of those things under this umbrella that is, full of educators and teachers and counselors and administrators. Like how? Like, there has to be accountability somewhere. Like, somebody knew, and I mean, not even he wasn't alone. He had his buddy, best friend was right next door in the same class, in the classroom right next door to him, and, they used to talk about this stuff all the time, and he also had accusations of having inappropriate relationships. So, like, he had a bestie at school that was doing the same stuff. And so there has to be definitely more accountability. And I definitely want these girls to understand that you don't have the right to say yes and no. So don't take all of that responsibility off of you because it's not you. And it wasn't me. You know what I mean? I can say that because what am I going to tell my daughter when she makes mistakes and she was like, I said yes. I was like, nope, you don't get to say yes. You should have asked me first. I'm the one that says yes for you or gives you the permission to say yes. And so I would want to make sure she knew that it's not your fault. And, yeah. And unfortunately there are so many victims that are scared to tell their truth. And so,
Well, I like to use this analogy. It's like, and I use it a lot when my son was little. He's 19 now, but it doesn't so it doesn't apply. But like if he walked into a gun store when he was 7 and said, "I want a gun," they wouldn't sell it to him. When he was 16 and said, "I want a tattoo," they wouldn't give it to him because he's not allowed to consent to those kinds of things. And and everyone's so adamant, "Oh, well, yeah, they can't have a tattoo." It's like, "Well, they also can't consent to sex." They're compliant, but they, as you said, they don't have the right to say yes. And that's where their parents, and I'm not blaming parents by any stretch but it's like, that's where we need the strong adults in people's lives. And in a lot of the sex abuse prevention education I do, is like we teach little kids to have a web of five people because, that you can trust because, two of them are going to be flakes and one's not going to know what to do. But at least one of those people's going to have their head screwed on straight and be able to help you.
Yeah.
So I want to go back to the atmosphere at Rosemead High School. So he had his little bestie who was also, alleged. There was Eric
Predator.
Burgess, who was working at the time. There were, Eric Burgess married one of his students, and they had a baby shower for this student. The teachers did. Which still grosses me out. What other things did you see when you were there? And then even when you went back to Rosemead to coach, I mean, were there things that you saw that made you go, oh my God, this is terrible?
Yes. I mean, we could talk for hours. I've got stories for
Great. That's
days.
what we're here for.
Okay. I can go back to another teacher that I had. And it's tough to point this out because I adored him. I really did adore him. And when I had first had him as a teacher, the information had already been shared that he had married a former student.
So now now we're up to 3 that we know of.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. You're gonna use more than one hand, that's sure. So, I had already known that he had married a former student. Okay, so all right. I mean, this was a very much older gentleman. Gosh, he must have been born in, let's say, mid to late 40s. So I mean, I don't know how old that would be, but yeah, he had to have been
Ancient
at
when
least
you're in high school.
60 when I was in high
Yeah.
school.
Yeah.
I know, so old. Yeah, he must have been around 60 when I was in high school. Um, like I said, I adored him. He was a great guy. He had been he had been there his entire career, essentially. I think he graduated from Rosemead, became a teacher at Rosemead, left to serve in Vietnam, and then he came back to teach again at Rosemead once he finished serving in the military. So he'd been there for a long time as a teacher. I believe my mother had him. So yeah, that just tells you. So then, I had him my sophomore year, and then it was, I believe, my senior year, I had him again. But what had happened was his wife had decided to divorce him right before he returned back to school. So he was totally depressed his entire time that he was like, basically he didn't teach us that whole year. He was so depressed. So yeah, so that had occurred. So I knew of him. Who else? Well, I mean, another very respected, he was the band leader for the longest time. He actually married one of his former band students. She was, I believe, in drill team or flags, which he supervised. Again, he was a very much older man, and his wife, they had been married. I mean, so same as like the other teacher I just told you about. They were married for like 20, 30 years, at least when I was in high school by then. And same thing, he had gone on to have a very long marriage until his death. 3 adult children, 2 of which are also teachers. So I mean, they had legitimate relationships with these students after high school, but yeah, how did that start?
Yeah, where
Like,
where was the grooming? And that's
yeah,
in a later episode we're going to talk with Cindy Lamb, which talks about the importance of grooming. What were they doing when these kids were students that made
yeah,
it so easy to marry them right after? And you hit on something else too, that one of the teachers had taught your mother, and that goes back to what Matt was saying, that there are generations of students at Rosemead High who the mother was abused and the daughter was abused, and it just kept going and going and going. So we're looking at, a 40, 50-year history of people turning a blind eye at this school, and, predators who ended up there like, wow, this is great. I'm gonna have my whole career here. Whereas people who are like, I don't like the boundaries, they go. And you want a school that's the other way around. You want a school where the predators go, I don't like it here. It's very uncomfortable. And they made it exactly opposite.
yes, it was, yeah. So it's been a predator's playground for many, many generations. But yeah, and then coincidentally, so my son had started high school as well. He graduated 2020. So that means, and I believe he started in 2016. 2015. while he was there, I had put him in cross country. And my first immediate my son has special needs. He has autism. And so I have to be a very hands-on parent. I've been a stay-at-home mom his entire life. And so I have to meet the coach. I have to sign him up. I have to get all the instructions. What does he need? Where do we go? All the communication goes through me. It doesn't, like normal kids in a sense, like the coach says, all right, we practice Monday through Wednesday, be here, da da da. And then the kid tells their parent. And it's different. The coach has to communicate with me. Immediately, I was met with resistance and basically ignored by this coach, and I was not happy about this, and so I actually enlisted the principal or the athletic director. I was like, "This guy is not responding to my calls, my emails. I need to know, when does the season start? Like, where does my son have to be? What do I need to do?" And they kinda didn't act like anything really bad was happening. They're like, "Oh, it's probably misunderstanding, he just didn't know." Well, from the beginning, the guy rubbed me the wrong way, and I didn't care for him whatsoever. But again, like, I'm at every practice because my son has communication issues, and he has a one-to-one as well. So if I'm not there, his one-to-one's there. And I'd actually gotten the district to assign a one-to-one, not just for school hours, but for practice hours as well. This one-to-one was with him the whole time, which was amazing. But I still would oversee the one-to-one. Like, I just being a victim makes you very on high alert.
Yeah.
So,
And
especially
he
with a
is
child that
so
can't
vulnerable, just
communicate.
like you were vulnerable.
Oh, majorly and vulnerable. And so I would always be present, and I just noticed my presence wasn't welcome. And I tried to be respectful. Like, I mean, not everyone's as friendly as I am. And we went as far as having like meetings in the principal's office with this coach. And this guy like had the audacity to like sit back in his chair and not take this mean serious, and was like, "Well, she wants me to be a cheerleader for this kid, that's not who I am." And I'm just like, "No, I just don't want you to be rude. Like, communicate with me. Like, it's not hard. I need to know what's happening with my child." And the principal was just kind of like, his behavior had been excused by multiple people, multiple administrators. And, I hate to throw people under the bus, but, yeah, a lot of people, I mean, one person even says, "We think he actually might be on the spectrum." And I was like, "That's not an excuse to behave like this. He's a coach. He has, 100 children under his supervision. He needs to communicate with parents. Like, I don't care what his issues are, like, I know, like, his behavior is unacceptable and I'm not okay with it." So I didn't let up, and I actually started to coach my son. Like, I got permission from administration to be hands-on with my son because he was not willing to give my son that attention. And so I was like, "That's fine. Fine. I don't want my son to take away from anybody else. I'll coach him myself." I was a runner as well. So that's what I did. Let's just go fast forward. So now I believe it's my son's junior year, and all of this is going on. I mean, the meetings with the principal, and everybody knows this guy and I are oil and water, and we don't care for one another. The kids knew, everybody knew. Well, the next thing I found out was that he was arrested on campus and hauled off by Temple City Sheriff's Department. I was like, "Whoa, what happened?" And there was the accusation that he had a relationship with a student, a current student. And I was like, "What?" I was like, I knew this guy was gonna dig his own hole one day, I
You
didn't know it was
you
gonna
were
be
in
to
the
that
way.
extent.
Yeah.
I just knew something was wrong with him. There was just something not right with him. Obviously, I didn't see anything. Like, I didn't see him inappropriate with a female. I mean, he was such an unlikable person. I was like, it blew my mind. I mean, but immediately people had thought he had an inappropriate relationship with my son. And that's why I was so involved in having these meetings. And I was like, "Oh, no, 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 no. Like, no, my son has nothing to do with this." Um, but yeah, it turned out that this basically he had a relationship with one student, Then he cheated on her or broke up with her to get with another student. And the first student found out about that. So then she went and reported him to the sheriff's department because she was scorned. And yeah, it all came crumbling down for him. I will say that I went to his arraignment because I wanted him to see me. I wanted him to see, like, I knew something was wrong with you. I didn't know it was that bad, and I was the only one there, as well as his mother, his sister, and the girl he was currently in the relationship with, the student.
And again, I want to reiterate, this isn't a consensual relationship. We just don't have the language to say what this horrible thing is. We got to figure out what language to use to describe it. And you said something else that, so the first, and she probably doesn't even know she's a survivor yet.
I don't even know if they're still together. They stayed together for quite a while. I mean, he served his time and then was put into a halfway house. So he's already out now. He's a registered sex offender and can't teach or do anything like that anymore.
Yeah, so that first girl who went and reported to the sheriff's department, and you said, yes, she was scorned. And as so bringing back to a little bit of my own story, when I went to the university where the guy who abused me taught, and I brought all these documents that said, he abused me and other girls, and the president of the university, now this is 2004, I think I went there, and the abuse had happened in the 80s. I'm older than you are. And he said, well, Joelle, you're really just a bitter ex-girlfriend who's upset that my teacher boyfriend broke up with me. I'm like, I was 15, 16, 17. This is a non-consensual relationship. I was groomed. This is illegal. But that was the opinion. It's still the opinion of that university. Hopefully the girl who reported and then the girl in the second one have come to some kind of understanding and healing that what happened to them was wrong. And hopefully, they're coming to terms with that. That's gnarly. That is rough.
Yeah. Yes. Evil. Ugh, evil. Yeah. So no, I mean, there's more and more stories. There's so many more, but yeah. So I mean, and this is all just, again, these are all recent stories. I mean, everything, with Eric Burgess leaving, there are still other allegations against current teachers that are on campus.
Now, are you still working on campus, coaching and stuff like that?
No, I stopped coaching just about around 2 years ago. So no, I'm not coaching currently. I do want to return. I do have plans to return to some degree.
Really? Even after all this?
Yes. Oh, definitely. I'm just starting in a sense. I learned how to be an advocate for my son early on. And so having a child with special needs, I've learned what the difference is of a present parent and a non-present parent. And again, I understand what a non-present parent is because that's what I had. My mother worked to support her children, and that is very noble, but there is a big difference for children that have a present parent and don't have one. And that was one of those differences I always wanted to have. They say, when you have your kids, you always want to give them a better life than what you had, and I swear in a couple generations, we're going to have all these kings and princesses walking around because, that's how we treat our children. That's how I treat my children. They are the world to me, and there's nothing I won't do to help them. And so being present, and advocating for children that don't have a parent that can be present. And I'm very, sympathetic to that. I get it. I know what it takes to raise kids. It's not easy. It takes a village for one. So no two parents should be alone, let alone one parent that's doing it on their own, whether it's a dad or a mom. And so if we could have more advocates for kids, and that's what teachers are supposed to be, that's what administrators are supposed to be, and counselors and coaches, almost coaches More, because I mean, even, as teachers, they've got a job to do. They're there to teach your children, to, convey whatever message that they have in whatever subject that they're teaching. But coaches, you get to have these kids when they're doing something fun and they're relaxed and they're not stressed. And
And they
that's
like
why
it.
you
They're
end up
there because they
having.
want to be.
Yes. And so you get to see them more in their own element, and they're going to share with you like, oh, I'm so stressed with this, and oh, I have this at home, and da da da. So you, as a coach, you have to be very careful, like, to keep those boundaries that I'm not your friend. I'm friendly with you, but I'm not your friend. I still have a responsibility to protect you. And so, you know, I love advocating for kids, whether I'm doing it at PTA or I'm on an AYSO board, for my daughter's soccer, region. Um, I do it. I volunteer constantly because I want to advocate for the kids. I love them. I love being able to give them happiness and protection, because we all need it. And I wished more people did it for me when I was younger. And so I definitely see this being a long-term career. I have intentions to run for school board. Um, I've definitely decided that I also want to start teaching, so I'll be applying for my credential shortly. I mean, all of these things are in the works as of right now. So, I'm going to be more present than ever, in the next few coming years, and hopefully that's how I'll spend the rest of my career, is being
It's
there for them. And like I
amazing.
said, I still have a young one, so she's only 10. So I got a whole, lot more years to go in the public school system, which I love for her.
You know, it's that's really inspiring because I tend to be far more cynical and bitter. Like, oh, I hate the high school and rah rah rah. And you're like showing me this, like, wait a minute, I can actually, like, well, no, I certainly can't go back there and work or advocate because I'm sure they put a restraining order on me. But it's very inspiring because you have taken this and turned it into, I mean, advocacy has so many different avenues, and I love the avenue that you've taken. That is
Yeah, I
awesome.
mean, the ultimate role is to advocate for the children and to represent them in a positive way. But I'm also not unaware of what it takes as an administrator or a teacher. I have sympathies for them as well. They are tasked with a huge responsibility with very little pay. I mean, so don't get me started. I will be like, go off about how we pay professional athletes millions and millions of dollars, and then yet we have these people we entrust our children to, and they get pennies. So in comparison, but I'm very sympathetic to them as well. Like, I get it. And I want to bridge that. I want to be a part of that bridge. To, I don't want advocates to be looked at as like, the enemy of administrators, and this kind of leads into that bill that you and I had briefly discussed, that Senator Sasha Perez had put forth, in order to protect children. While the goal is to protect children, it's not meant to go against teachers and to spite them. It's, if you, as an educator or administrator, if you're doing your job, you're upholding your ethics and, you're mandating reporting, then you'll have no problem with this bill. And that's ultimately why they agreed to it. I mean, the teachers union was were one of the opponents of it at first, until there were some revisions made. And I understand that they have to protect themselves too. But ultimately, if we all have the same goal, that's why they're there. I mean, I know a teacher is not there because it's fun. It's
Yeah.
hard work. And so they obviously too want to be advocates for kids, and it takes a village, it takes a team. We're not supposed to be against one another. And so,
And
I mean, that's,
so the bill you're talking about, this is California's SB 848, correct? Yeah.
yes.
And what this bill does, among other things, is it requires teachers coming into districts to list every single district where they've ever worked. And then they can do thorough checks, because, I mean, it could have been easy to say, well, I'll just skip that district where I had the allegations against me, and I'll skip the school where the principal quietly asked me to leave. But, so it puts it all down, and they've already started putting it in place, because when I applied to substitute, because I'm kind of like semi-retired. I had some spare time and go back to teaching. And I had to list the districts I taught. I'm like, God, that was like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm so old.
Oops, I forgot about that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, okay, 30 years ago. Okay. I think, okay, I taught. And then it's like, well, I'm not sure I taught in that one, but I'll put it down anyway, just in case, But I think it's a great first step. And it's important, because keeping you, the goal, and this is something that is to make it as difficult as possible for a predator to work at your school. They want to go to the easy schools. And if they go, oh crap, in California, I have to list all those districts, forget it. I'm moving to,
Nevada.
name a state that doesn't have those requirements. And
Yes.
so I think the harder we make it for predators to work in our schools, the less we can make a school like Rosemead, the better off and safer all our kids will be until we have that perfect world we've been looking for.
Yes, I agree 100%. So yeah, I was 100% behind the bill. I was asked to come speak when it was in front of one of the panels, and so I did. I went and I spoke gladly. It was a wonderful experience. Um, I'm glad that others followed suit. Cindy Lamb also went up there. And so with that help, I think with every voice that got behind it, it just helped push it to the front a little bit further. And so, yeah, Senator Perez is amazing, and I am so grateful that she did that and put her name on it and rode it all the way home. So I think it's just a start. There's tons more to change. Um, and I think if we have the right people in place to help that, then I think we're going to be just fine. We'll get there. I'm very confident that we're going to get there. I'm not going to give up at all.
So we're going to wrap this up, but is there anything that we've missed? Anything that you want to tell people who are listening to this?
I guess I also want to make sure that if somebody was a victim, that they then start to see themselves as a survivor, and that they don't have to share their story on a grand level. They don't have to put their name out there in order to be validated. That they can listen to other people like myself and be like, you know what, that's okay. I'm going to validate myself that I'm a survivor, and that I can do whatever it is that's within my means and power to make sure this doesn't happen to somebody else. But that I really hope that women, or even young men that have experienced this, that they don't ignore themselves, and that they get whatever help that they need, whether it's talking to a spouse or even their parent. Or a therapist. Oh, I love therapy. So I'm a huge proponent of that. But that they too can come out of this and find some sort of positive aspect, knowing that they're going to protect another child from it, or that they'll make sure that they keep themselves safe for the rest of their lives.
Kristy, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I can't thank you enough. This has been such an important and interesting discussion, because I think we're just scratching the surface of what we all need to talk about when it comes to educator sexual misconduct, because it is so complicated and nuanced in so many cases, and your truth and your voice are such an important part of helping other survivors come forward and keeping students safe from abuse. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I definitely would love to do more work like this and reach youth. I think that's also why, I want to get involved with the high schools. I want to reach children. We have to start there. It's important that we obviously properly train administrators and teachers and coaches, but these kids need to hear it from us as well, from survivors as well, that, okay, I'm seeing myself in this situation. I need to get myself out of this situation, and give them the proper tools. So, but I'm happy to come back anytime.
Awesome. So I want to listening to the Crossing the Line podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcast, YouTube, and anywhere that you download your digital content. Feel free to leave us a 5-star review, especially on Apple Podcasts. That allows other people to find us. And thank you again on behalf of NC Sesame. And I'm Joelle Casteix, your host, and this was the Crossing the Line podcast.